It's The World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. Joining us from New York City, Noor Ibrahim, Daily Beast Deputy World Editor. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I hope you're well too.
We're doing okay, I think. Lila Jacinto, Senior Editor at France24.com, here to answer that question.
How am I? Good.
Good. Okay, that's a Kurt Good. Matthias Krupa, Paris correspondent for the German magazine Die Zeit. How are things with you?
Good as well. I'm sorry.
You're sorry that it's good. Okay.
No dissenting vote.
All right. France 24 senior correspondent Elena Volochin, host of our Scene from Russia Media Watch segment in French. How are things with you?
Well, war is not over, but so far we're okay.
So far, we're still here. You can also, by the way, listen, like, subscribe to The World This Week on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and other fine streaming services. Yeah, no World War III this week, no nuclear winter, but NATO got a scare. More on that in a moment. And Ukraine's capital got its first snowfall of the season. That was on Thursday, a reminder that winter is indeed coming. And while a week ago, Ukraine was celebrating the reconquering of Kherson. It's since been the target of what looks like revenge strikes that, according to the Prime Minister, disrupted 40% of the country's power supply, with outages felt from east to west and even over the border in Moldova. Elena Volochin, think back to 1 week ago. Is this the scenario you envisaged?
Yeah, exactly. But, well, no, not exactly. I think this was an accident. Let's say it like that.
I'm first talking about the Russian airstrikes themselves.
No, the Russian airstrikes, yes, of course. As you mentioned, they had to withdraw from Kherson, which is like politically a suicide for the Vladimir Putin regimes. He did that because he had no other choice regarding the military situation on the ground. And I think his new general, Sergei Surovikin, has to have a job to convince him that he had no other choice than withdraw from Kherson. So this is his way to maintain, the terror all over Ukraine by striking the whole territory and to target civilians and to put up this energetic terror, as Volodymyr Zelensky called it. So, but if we talk about the pieces that fall on the Poland ground, it was clearly an accident. So yeah, we were all scared that at least Russia is targeting a NATO country, but it was absolutely different scenario.
Yeah, that is the question. How close did NATO come to an escalation with Russia? A Russian-made missile landing on a Polish farming village Tuesday, as Elena says, killing 2 agricultural workers. The Polish president found that initial evidence pointed to Ukrainian anti-air defense, a claim that was quickly backed by NATO allies, but initially denied by a Ukrainian president who stated, "I have no doubt that this is not our missile." By Thursday, Volodymyr Zelensky was gently rolling back that claim, going from "we didn't do it" to we don't know, in a statement that he put out.
We don't know for sure. The world doesn't know, but I'm sure it was a Russian missile. I'm sure we fired from air defense systems. It's impossible to say anything specific today. It's only after the investigation that we will be able to draw conclusions.
Surprising. It feels like it's the first time since the start of the war that Zelensky's been out of sync with his NATO allies. Noor Ibrahim?
Oh, yeah, sorry, I hear you now. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really been fascinating to watch the blame game that's been going on, especially in terms of how openly Zelensky and NATO were clashing on this. And I think it just goes to show that, even between allies like the US and Ukraine, there always have been some cracks and some disagreements. And those will continue. And I think, at the heart of that is just a disagreement on just how involved NATO should get in this war. So, yeah, I think obviously every party has their own agenda in mind, but I think everyone just moved way too quickly without complete information. They were quick to make judgments, and that's not just coming from world leaders, but even the press. The AP corrected its initial statement, the initial report that it made, saying that that a U.S. government intelligence official had claimed that it was indeed Russian missiles that landed in Poland. But I think by that point, the damage was already done, and it had spiraled into this huge thing.
And now, is everything back in order? I know the Ukrainians are saying that they've been invited in to see the investigation site, Lila Jacinto.
Well, as you say, I mean, those hours on Tuesday were really tense in the newsroom. But I disagree that everybody, came out very strongly. Yes, the AP, the polls, let's give them credit. I thought that they were very measured in their response. We just initially had the fire brigade saying there was an explosion and 2 people died. There was no sense of a missile. There was an AP story that quoted a U.S. intelligence official as saying that it was a Russian missile, but it was very preliminary. As soon as Poland went into an emergency security council meeting, and the first official voice that came out was a toning down. By that point, we were already starting to look at the scenarios of Article 5. Would NATO be drawn into this? And at that stage, they talked about Article 4. So immediately there was a ratcheting down from Article 5 to Article 4. So the messaging from NATO and from Poland and from the US has been measured. Zelensky, there are 2 things that came out of what happened on Tuesday. One is the threat of the scenario that we've all been aware of, that, in the fog of war, these sort of things can happen and we can lead into an escalation. 2 is another thing, which is...
Yeah, there were a lot of allusions to World War I and how the death of one person can lead to global conflict.
Exactly. So we sort of, we were looking at this scenario and we felt like this was coming. But also, from the point of view of the Ukrainian president's reaction, this has also brought to light the fact that, there are vested interests in this war. And yes, we are completely behind Ukraine, but on his messaging, Zelensky, who has done extremely well for the past 8 months, shot his mouth. We understand. I mean, Ukraine is at war. It is fighting a war. But it was not very measured comments.
Matthias Krupa, how do you explain it?
Yeah, I think my colleague explained it very well. The first thing maybe about the media reaction, it was AP, and it was, of course, in the social media sphere that the World War III has already started, or you might have the idea that the World War has already started. So, to be honest, I was once again happy that we are not governed by journalists and by social media users. On the other side, the reactions, and I think it's remarkable. You mentioned already Poland, the Polish government, and I think it was particularly remarkable how calm and responsible the Polish government did react, because even the Polish government is sometimes always seen, not at least in Germany and in other Western parts of Europe, as on the very sharp side, on the very hawkish, on the maybe escalating side. And here, when it really comes to real danger, they were calm, responsible, and in line with all the other NATO allies. And so I think this was, if there is any good news in this moment, this was the good news.
We mentioned at the outset that it was 1 week ago that the trigger, perhaps, for all the events that have unfolded since, this recapture by the Ukrainians of Kherson, where the Associated Press filmed the fire department on Thursday going around. Look, they have equipment. It seems like it's loaned from either Germany or Austria, because some of that equipment's in German on the back. Going around taking down billboard posters like this one that reads, "We are together with Russia." Or there's another one here that reads, "Kherson is a city with Russian history. That was a billboard that was put up by the occupiers, Elena Voloshin.
Yeah, they put this all over the places they occupy, especially Kherson. Kherson was occupied since the very beginning of the war, since the 1st of March, and written exactly on these posters entirely, it is Russia and Kherson are together forever. That's the word that Vladimir Putin used on the 30th of September when he announced the annexation of new four Ukrainian regions that he invaded.
So officially, this is now Russian territory that the Ukrainians are occupying,
according
right?
to the international law, of course not, but according to the law of the Russian Federation itself and only, yes, it is.
So how is the Kremlin reacting?
Territory. Yeah, obviously. I mean, Vladimir Putin, he's been totally absent from this statement that Russia is withdrawing. He let it to the army to announce that. Since then, he didn't comment at all on this, like if it didn't happen. So I think all the red lines from Vladimir Putin saying that his territory is being attacked, etc., exploded with the retaking of Kherson by Ukrainian army, because according to Russia, officially it is its own territory. So it's more than ever legitimate on the eyes of the Russian propaganda, the Russian official narrative, to do something to react on this, and they don't react at all. I think this shows more than anything that Russia is really in difficulty, military, and it can't do just anything in front of the Ukrainian advancement.
Noor Ibrahim, of course, the Daily Beast has been reporting a lot during the week about how it's all being played in Moscow itself.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that I agree with what was just said about how absent Putin has been. I think there's a lot of confusion right now. And while I do agree that the military does appear to be floundering at the moment, I don't know if I would write it off just yet. I know early on during the Kherson retreat, there were concerns that this is just part of a bigger strategy to regroup and then attack with full force again. So I wouldn't want to jump to any conclusions too quickly, but yeah, it's safe to say that there's just been a lot of talk of Putin's mindset, how isolated he's been, murmurs of his own men potentially turning against him and having doubts about where things are headed. I think the climate there is very tense at the moment. And like I said, just a lot of confusion, and it's not very clear where he stands.
A lot of confusion, a lot of anxiety on the side of NATO, as Lila was saying earlier. When missiles fell into Poland, G20 leaders were smack in the middle of a summit in Bali. That sparked an impromptu crisis meeting of the G20's NATO members. This photo was taken by Germany's government spokesperson, Stefan Heberstreit. It shows Joe Biden, the UK's Rishi Sunak, and they're both sitting down. Olaf Scholz, there you can see with his arms crossed. Spain's Pedro Sanchez, Canada's Justin Trudeau, and select foreign ministers surrounding France's Emmanuel Macron. Matthias Krupa, your thoughts when you saw that?
I was. It comes to my mind that a similar picture some years ago was made by Angela Merkel. To be honest, I don't remember.
We have that picture for you.
You have that.
We're going to show it in a minute.
You will show it in a minute. And the more this interesting. So now it's not the German Chancellor who is in the middle of the game. It's the French Chancellor. Maybe that's by here. This is it when she's lecturing, or when it looks like
that was a
G7
summit in Canada.
Donald Trump.
The American is always sitting.
They're always the oldest at the table. Maybe it's the reason
Or the
why
wisest. No, the wisest. Sorry.
No, it comes to so. Of course, there is some symbolic in it. I think it would be overrated to say that Macron is in the middle of is really in the middle of the game.
Well, let's go back to the first picture and take a look at it again. Lila Jacinto, pop quiz, because this is an impromptu meeting of all the NATO leaders that are attending the G20 summit. And when you look at that first picture, there is one leader who's missing, who's not in the room. Which one is it? Let's
I
take a-
need to see the picture.
There
again.
you can see it in front of you right now. Look in front of you in the screen there.
Right.
It's Vladimir Putin because it was a G8.
No,
before
no,
it
no.
became the
A
G7.
NATO leader. A
NATO.
NATO leader is missing.
No, it's the G7. It was a G8.
Erdogan.
There's no Poland, is there?
No, Poland was not at the G20.
Not at the G. Okay, I give up. We're wasting airtime.
Oh, we're wasting airtime. The answer is Turkey. Recep Tayyip Erdogan, quoted by
Erdogan.
Politico as saying he doesn't attend unimportant meetings. In front of the cameras, Erdogan stressing how he was trying to broker a Black Sea grain export deal between Kyiv and Moscow.
Burada ısrarla
I think that insisting on this incident by saying this is Russian-made will cause provocation.
tahrik eder diye düşünüyorum. Ve bir an önce tabii biz
We are trying to gather Russia and Ukraine around the same table as soon as possible.
bu gayretin içerisinde
Using provocation while we are engaged in this effort would not be right.
doğru olmasa gerek.
And he succeeded, right? We've had this extension of the deal that enables Russian and Ukrainian grain and fertilizers to go to the rest of the planet via the Black Sea and the Bosphorus.
Well, Erdogan has stepped in as the mediator since the Feb 24th invasion. And, you might recall, Francois, that, before the war in Ukraine, the big problem within the NATO alliance was Erdogan when he's buying of S-400 Russian defense shields, etc. So Erdogan has always played it his way. Right now, he's put himself in this role where, for better or worse, we do need him, because he did manage the Black Sea grain deal, which was really the only deal we've managed to have since the start of the invasion. But Erdogan is watching his re-election. We had an attack in Istanbul by the PKK. It's the same sort of replay that is now happening in the context.
And he might also be making money because there are reports this week that refined petroleum products from
In
Turkey are going towards Europe. And where does the crude for that refined petroleum
And even
come?
refining wheat into flour for Africa. So there is no doubt, that Erdogan is looking after his self-interest.
The Kremlin this Friday talking up the prospect of new deals between Russia and Turkey on gas and oil.
Yeah, well, Erdogan is an ally from Vladimir Putin. We know that, even though on the military grounds, sometimes their allies fight one against the other, like in Syria. But on diplomatically, they get along pretty well. They are like an old couple. But I wouldn't overestimate maybe the role of Erdogan in this deal. Of course, he's in a good position for the mediation. But this grain deal, both Russia and Ukraine are interested in it. And Russia is also interested in it in the eyes of its African supporters and in the eyes of the African countries. So if there is nothing that Russia and Ukraine would want to agree on it, they wouldn't agree on it, whatever the mediator would be. So, I mean, yes, he's in a good position. He's the right person to do the mediation, but it's not only about the form, it's about the deal in itself. Both Russia and Ukraine wanted to work.
Matthias Krupa, you were alluding to that photo from 2018 and that G7 summit in Canada where it was Donald Trump in that picture, by the way, having an argument over trade with his G7 partners. This was the week also where Trump announced his re-election bid for 2024. Seen from Germany, right now we had that unity that you described earlier when it came to the incident this week. What's the thought when it comes to Europe's defense and NATO?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same since the beginning of this war that we always must have in mind what would have happened with Donald Trump as president. Nobody really knows, but of course, many things, and to form, to build, to forge the unity of the NATO allies might have been much more difficult. than now. And so I think this is a clear warning. To be honest, I've been a little bit surprised after the midterms, which went not so well for Donald Trump. But now we are. I have the idea, or I have the feeling that we are a little bit too relaxed when he announced his that he will run another time, because we think, okay, he has already lost the last elections and so on. And even with another candidate from the Republicans, even with the Ron DeSantis, it might be another play, and it might be much more. It will be much more difficult. It would be much more difficult to have this unity among NATO allies.
Noor Ibrahim, do you agree that NATO allies should worry about 2024?
Absolutely. I think it's going to be a ride. I think everyone's watching it closely. And I think one of the main concerns there is Ukraine, and how that will affect funding, how that will affect aid that has been just so instrumental to keeping the Russians at bay. And we've seen already, how catastrophic it can be when that support isn't there. And I think that with the possible return of Trump, it could have a real effect in terms of swinging the war in a different direction. So I think on a global level, that would be one of the main concerns people would have with the return of Trump.
What we saw at this G20 summit, Lila Jacinto, was the waning influence of Russia. Vladimir Putin did not attend. He sent his foreign minister instead. And we saw the West lobbying India, lobbying China when it comes to Russia. Who was the star of the show for you at the G20? Was it Joe Biden? Was it Xi Jinping who was making his big outing on the world stage after being reanointed for
exactly.
a third term?
He met Biden on Monday, which really seems so far away right now. It wasn't the G20; it was the G19.
That was Volodymyr Zelensky's line. Yes,
Russia was absent. The foreign minister Sergei Lavrov was there for a day. Yes, and there was a lot of convincing of India and China. Primarily because, these are the countries that have sat on the fence. Who was the star of it? I would say it was Biden, because Biden set the tone with his meeting with Xi Jinping. It sort of set the tone for all the, in the final declaration, we did have a mention of the war in Ukraine. It was called the war, and very cleverly, what the Indonesians did was that in the declaration, they addressed the war in Ukraine as a matter of the global economy. So first and foremost, it was derided as a global economic issue. So that brought all these countries that have been sitting on the fence together.
Including Indonesia itself.
Including Indonesia. And yes, of course, the statement said most of us, disagree with this war and calling for an immediate end. Another thing that happened was that India now takes over the G20 leadership. So it did not want the G20 to end without a declaration. And, there had to be some agreement on this. There was no question of not having a declaration. But lastly, my point of view is, it's being read now as the success, a relative success, the G20. But really with India and China, they have been just sitting it out on vested interests, on their own self-interest. It's not like, anyone buying Russian arms after this invasion going like, yes, we're going to really buy some more arms. The Russian military has proved itself nobody wants their arms anymore. India is still getting extremely cheap Russian gas. So yes, it called for an end to this, an end to the war in Ukraine, but it was not really, I don't see it as that much of a bright spot in the G20.
All right, the Chinese, who, by the way, don't like it when that lobbying goes public or makes it into the public sphere. We had a hot mic incident. It was over human rights. It was between Xi Jinping and Canada's Justin Trudeau.
Everything we discuss is then leaked to the paper. That's not appropriate. And that's not how the way the conversation was
如果
conducted.
有诚心，咱们就用一种互相尊重的态度来进行很好的沟通，
If there is
否则这个结果就不好说了。
if
In
there is
Canada, we
sincerity
believe
on
in
your part,
free and open and frank dialogue, and that is what we will continue to have. We will continue to look to work constructively together, but there will be things we will disagree on, and we will have
有些可以建设性，但是
创造条件，创造条件。
let's create the conditions first.
好，好。
So, Matthias Krupa, who schooled who?
Good question. It took Justin Trudeau some seconds to realize what's happening to him, and his first nicking, and then he finds his at the end he finds his words. The most remarkable to me is that we have this sequence because normally the Chinese leader is never fluent in such a situation. He never speaks really to a Western public, or very rarely he speaks to a Western public, and here he speaks to Trudeau, but of course to a Western public. So I think this is really interesting. I'm not quite sure whether which is the objective he wants to.
You know what I think is going on here is what classic bullies do, which is China is extremely nice to Biden, but other countries, like Australia and Canada, they get the raw end of it. We saw it this week when the Kremlin spokesperson, praised the U.S. for its measured response to the missile
And summoned the
explosion.
Polish ambassador.
Exactly. So, this is what even Turkey does that. The U.S. journalists get away, but they will get the British journalists. A bully
But
understands power.
But it's not another thing to bullying journalists or ambassadors, but to bully.
Noor Ibrahim, did Justin Trudeau get bullied?
I disagree. I don't see it as an instance of bullying. I think it's one of those rare moments that, existing tensions between countries just spill over into an actual human interaction as opposed to the official statements that are usually released. And I think that, I wouldn't, if China had released a report or a statement in state media or something saying kind of the same thing that he told Jinping in person, that he told Trudeau in person, I don't think anyone would have batted an eye at that. But that said, I'm not surprised with how much attention it's getting. I think it's always fascinating to watch world leaders in uncomfortable or human moments. But especially Trudeau, someone who's always presenting himself as so put together. So I think that's honestly the reason why people have had such a strong reaction to that clip. We just usually don't see moments like that.
I think he spoke to the wrong guy also, because as I remember Trudeau's position since the invasion of Ukraine, which started years ago actually by Russia, he always has been a hardliner towards countries that don't apply human rights and etc. He always speaks very frankly, and he's a tough guy on it. So I think Xi Jinping will not end up having what he wants from him.
It was a week where, for all the death and destruction we talk about, we marked births. We are now 8 billion on this planet and counting. At this Ghaziabad maternity in India's most populous state, Uttar Pradesh, the latest addition to the Sharma family arrived Tuesday, the same day that humanity passed that milestone. Lila Jacinto, our population has doubled on this planet in less than half a century.
Yes, and the problem with this is that the population is growing and we have one resource, the Earth. So when we're talking about climate, we look at it as a global resource. But when it comes to birth rates, it tends to be along national lines. So, even when, not that I favor this, but even when China had a one-child policy, they are now looking at an aging population, and they have now made.
And does India, which is set to surpass China next year, have the same problem?
Look, I mean, you cannot really have a hardline approach to controlling population. That is not the norm. It is much more. It's got to do with education and a standard of living, because that is really the real contraception. So the Indian birth rate will plateau, but the fact is we are way too many of us, and this is putting an enormous strain on the world, on the global, on climate change, and countries are still looking at it in terms of national lines. How will an aging population be provided by a reducing generation? And it's time to stop these sort of nationalist narratives on this.
A couple of decades back, Matthias Krupa, there was the German author Günter Grass, who wrote a book, Headburst, The Germans Are Dying Out.
But it was not Günter Grass.
It was?
Maybe. I'm not quite sure. I don't think so.
But okay, maybe it was not. Maybe I'm going to stand corrected. I'm citing this from memory. How do Germans see it today? Because for decades we've been talking about Italy and Germany and Europe the population is declining. Was this 8 billion a big deal for the Germans?
It was not at the front page. At the front pages this week, but it was. We got notice of it, of course. Yes, I agree. It is a problem for the whole world, and it's another factor of globalization. But of course, there are national and regional and continental differences. I mean, with the growing of the population is not growing in all parts of the world. It's growing in Africa. It's growing in Asia. It's not growing in Latin America. It's not growing in Europe. So it has an impact. It has also an impact not only on resources but also on geopolitical questions, and of course it's different if you have an aging. You have different problems if you have an aging population or whether you have a younger population. So I think, on the one hand, you're right to say we have to tackle it as a common problem when it comes to resources and not at least first and foremost to climate change. But at the other hand, of course, there are huge regional differences and even national differences.
Huge regional, huge national differences. And, it was Tuesday when we passed that 8 billion mark. The same day, we saw that maternity in Uttar Pradesh, in the capital of war-torn Ukraine, a very different take from the mother of a baby girl from the Kyiv suburb of Brovary.
Overpopulation isn't an issue. It is not a problem for us. Our concern is having peace in our country. Ukraine's victory is the most important thing right now.
So there you have it, Elena Voloshin, a country that's facing an existential crisis, fighting a war against a country that's invaded it, and where the population is diminishing. And you wonder, is demographics a factor?
I mean, in Ukraine, no. For Russia, obviously, yes, because there is a demographic deep crisis in Russia, and now they need more and more men to go to fight to the war. So that's why the mobilization announced by Vladimir Putin is such a tragedy for Russian people, because they have one unique son in the family very often, and this son has been sent to war. I understand also from the Ukrainian perspective, I understand this mother very much. As a journalist, I would feel very strange to ask her this question when she's in a, I mean, she's gave birth, but definitely demography, I mean, is the last of her concerns. Now she's thinking how her baby is going to live in a war targeted country.
And Lila was mentioning at the outset, we have a crowded planet, limited resources, and it happens the same week that we've had world leaders showing up in the Egyptian resort of Sharm el-Sheikh for the COP27 summit. Environmentalists cheering on Thursday the return of Lula, Brazil's once and now future president, promising to reverse the agro-industry policies of the outgoing Jair Bolsonaro.
There will be no climate security if the Amazon isn't protected. We will spare no effort to bring the deforestation and degradation of our biomes to zero by 2030.
Now, Noor Ibrahim, we don't know what the final communique from that COP27 summit will look like. We know they're going to go over in their negotiations over how to finance the energy transition this planet needs. Interesting, though, when you contrast this 8 billion mark with the words of Lula talking about preserving the Amazon forest.
Absolutely. I mean, I think one environmentalist called the draft, which, let's note, is not complete yet, so we don't want to jump to conclusions, but they called it climate hell specifically because it doesn't address two major points, which, like you said, is the climate damage fund, as well as phasing down fossil fuels. So it's not looking great, but I think we have to wait and see how that turns out. In terms of Lula, I think he's making some huge promises, but as we all know, it's going to be a very, very uphill battle for him. A huge opposition in Congress. The election in Brazil was just incredibly divided. And he just has so much damage to undo from the Bolsonaro administration in terms of record deforestation and protecting indigenous communities and environmental agencies. We see big promises at every single one of these. So, I'm hopeful for change. I'm glad that there's a chance at it now, as far as Amazon and Brazil is concerned. But we'll just have to wait for the best. I mean, the pressure is on, I think.
Noor Ibrahim, spare a thought before we go for the king of beers, or at least that's the claim by U.S. brewer Budweiser, proud sponsor of the Qatar 2022 Football World Cup, but maybe not as proud as it was when it woke up this morning, discovering 48 hours before the kickoff of the tournament, there'll be no alcoholic beverages inside of the stadiums. Your thoughts?
Me?
Yes.
Yes. Sorry, it was cutting out a bit. But yeah, I mean, I think it's just, the latest addition to a very long list of controversies about the World Cup. And it started from the very beginning, from the corruption allegations about how they managed to win this bid in the first place, the social issues, the obvious appalling treatment of workers. So I think that was just, the cherry on top of the cake. But I think, everyone's looking at this in terms of how did we end up in this situation. I understand that, some are very vocal about the fact that we should just focus on soccer, focus on football. But when the issues are this glaring and this obvious from the get-go till now, I think it's just hard to look away.
Yeah, Qatar under the limelight, and so is FIFA. Local residents expressing, by the way, mixed feelings when it comes to this beer ban.
I think it should be allowed because, there are many people from all over the world coming here, and previously FIFA have been selling alcohol publicly.
The whole reason why I came to this country is so that I can enjoy, have the facilities and the advantage of living in a modern economy, but with Islamic heritage. That's the reason I want, and I don't want to, I'll be the last person you ask this question. I wouldn't want to see that lifestyle compromised. I wouldn't want, with my kids and my family enjoying my time out and being confronted by drunken society. I wouldn't say hooligan, but drunken and disorderly fans.
Lila Jacinto?
What's the question?
When you, you have to respect the local customs when you go somewhere, and if the local custom is it's a dry Emirates, then so be it.
I sort of agree. I mean, the whole. All this controversy we've had for the past 12 years. We knew that this bid went to Qatar. There was the FBI had arrests after that. But the mantra at that point was this is a World Cup and the Middle East has not hosted a World Cup. So different parts of the world have different cultures. how did Budweiser sponsor this event? Maybe they need cultural advisors. Or, maybe this World Cup is not really World Cup because, there are huge parts of the world where drinking is forbidden. So, if you have a world, they have different cultures.
Elena Voloshin?
Well, on the ban, I don't have any ultimate opinion, but this World Cup definitely reminds me. I've covered both the World Cup in Russia, the FIFA World Cup in 2018, and the Olympic Games in Sochi in 2014. And this World Cup rather reminds me of the first event of the Olympic Games, because by 2018, Russia would already have all this, the war in Ukraine, the annexation of Crimea, kind of an international isolation, not like today, but already a little bit, the doping scandal. So they were
which FIFA ignored.
Yes, which were all also totally ignored by FIFA and the international community. So they were very, very, a good pupil for the 2018 World Cup. No corruption scandals, no scandals with working, even in the buildings of new stadiums. The thing was like pretty much clear. Yes, there were people relocated, their houses destroyed, but this was all very local problems. No one would really care. But in 2014, for the Sochi Olympics, you would also have stories of foreign workers from Central Asia not being paid, working in horrible conditions, dying on the construction site. So for this, it was like exactly the same scheme.
And you had another parallel, which is Qatar, a place where it's perhaps too hot most of the day to play football, hence why the tournament was moved. And Sochi, a place where it's not cold enough to have Winter Olympics.
Yeah, well, there's also the climate question, but the most important point to me is as far as I remember, Amnesty International mentioned something like 6,500 foreign workers have died since. It's huge, since 2008 in Qatar, and you would have also this tragedy in Russia during the. And so that just reminds me that the international community is ignoring this situation when it comes to big events that gathers a lot of money. So,
that is the whole point. It's always the same story. And frankly,
the French president said, "Don't mix politics and sports."
It's always mixed, even how Qatar got the bid, is that big news that there's corruption in FIFA? Maybe Qatar just played the game. They made deal making. There's the line between corruption and deal making. And frankly, this really smacks of grapes are sour, the way because we had the World Cup in Argentina under a military junta. So, the talking points are never new, but the outrage is always new. Let's just accept this is what it is.
Some at least say that they've had enough. The banning messages of support for human rights, calling for politics to stay out of sports. That was what Gianni Infantino, the head of FIFA, said. But then he went to the G20 and pleaded with leaders there. This was this week, for a tournament-long truce in the fighting in Ukraine. That was enough for the head of the German Football Federation to announce that it will not be backing Infantino's re-election next year.
Especially after his letter 2 weeks ago that human rights should not play a role and that we should focus on football, we were considerably irritated and we decided not to back his nomination.
Matthias Krupa?
I'm not quite sure whether this is the biggest problem of the world, whether Gianni Infantino maybe will be re-elected. But it is already said there is a political decision to give be it the Olympic Games, be it the World Cup, to a particular country. The reason is particularly political. And the former French president, not Macron, but Sarkozy, was involved in convincing the members of the FIFA to give it to Qatar.
There was a criminal investigation.
There's a criminal investigation here in France. And then when it comes to the games or when it comes to the cup, it said no, it has nothing to do with we don't mix up politics with sports. So this is ridiculous. And I'm really curious how this next 4 weeks or 5 weeks will play out. I'm really interested. I'm much much more interested in the, let's say, in the political outfall than in the question who is winning the World Cup at the end.
All right, the defending champions, by the way, do you remember the names of them?
Who was it?
France.
We'll leave it there for now. Matthias Krupa, I want to thank you. I want to thank Lila Jacinto, Elena Volochin. I want to thank Noor Ibrahim for being with us from New York City. Thank you for joining us here in The World This Week.